Welcome to Fluent by Story, where we turn real-life experiences into powerful English learning journeys. In today's video, you'll hear a deeply personal story titled, How I Trained My Brain to Think in English Naturally. If you've ever struggled with translating in your head, feeling stuck when speaking, or wondering how to truly think in English, this story is for you. Listen carefully, follow along, and let it guide your own journey to fluency. Let's begin. Memories grew up in a small town where my family and friends all spoke our local language. In school, I learned English as a subject. We used textbooks, memorized vocabulary, and practiced grammar exercises every day. Yet, even after years of study, every time I tried to speak in English, I found myself thinking first in my native language and then translating. This habit made me slow and unsure, and it prevented me from truly communicating in English. When I was a child, I remember sitting in class and trying hard to follow every rule. My teacher explained the past tense and present tense, and I wrote sentences in my exercise book. I memorized lists of adjectives and nouns, but I never felt comfortable using them in conversation. I heard the correct pronunciation, but it did not come naturally. I always felt that my brain was working in two parts. One part thought in my first language, and the other translated it into English. This separation made conversations awkward and difficult. After finishing school, I went to college. I still struggled with English, and I became embarrassed when I had to speak in front of others. I remember one day during an important presentation, my mind went blank. I could see the words on my notes, but they did not turn into the natural flow of a sentence in English. I ended up pausing many times and apologizing. That moment hurt me deeply and made me promise myself that I would find a way to overcome this problem. My first big step came when I started my first job after college. The office was international, the emails were in English, and most of my colleagues were from different parts of the world. At first, I felt out of place in meetings, while others spoke confidently. I sat quietly, worrying that if I spoke, I would make a mistake. I realized that I was not alone in my struggle. Many of my colleagues mentioned that they too had found it hard to think in English when they were starting out. That conversation gave me a new hope. I decided then that I would begin training my brain to think in English and not just speak it. I remember the exact night I made that decision. It was quiet, and I sat alone in my small room. I looked around and thought of all the English words I had learned over the years. I realized that I had a good foundation, but all those words stayed locked in my memory. I had to unlock them and let them flow naturally in my mind. I said to myself, from today, I will not translate. I will make English a part of my thinking process. This promise was the beginning of my real journey. The next morning, I put my plan into action. I started with small changes. First, I changed the language on my phone and computer to English. Every time I unlocked my phone, I saw English words, and slowly my brain started to recognize them without the extra step of translation. I also changed the language on my social media accounts, following pages and subscribing to channels that posted in English. I wanted every moment of my day to be a little bit more in English. At breakfast, I turned on a YouTube channel that spoke slowly and clearly in English. I listened carefully as the host explained simple things. Even though I had already learned English in class, hearing real people talk made a huge difference. I noticed the natural rhythm of sentences and the way words connected. As I ate, I repeated some of the phrases in my mind. I told myself, I will live in English today. It was a small step, but it felt like the first brick in building a new habit. I soon found that I could use even the most ordinary moments to practice. When I went outside, I would speak softly to myself in English. If I saw a bird on a branch, I would say, "Look at that beautiful bird. It sings sweetly." When I looked at the sky, I would say, "Today is bright and clear. I feel happy and free." These simple sentences were my way of turning every thought into English. Sometimes I even whispered in the mirror, "Hello, I am learning to think in English. I am doing it step by step." At first, this seemed odd, but with time, it became a natural habit. One of the most important parts of my journey was keeping a journal. Every evening, I sat down with a notebook and wrote about my day in English. I wrote about what I had seen, what I had done, and how I had felt. I wrote simple sentences at first, using words I was comfortable with. Over time, I added more details. Writing in English every day helped me organize my thoughts in the language. It was like building small bridges between my native language and English that eventually merged into one. I also started watching English movies and TV shows with subtitles. At first, I relied on my native language subtitles, but soon I switched to English subtitles. This was a challenge because the words on the screen moved quickly. Still, watching and reading at the same time helped me connect the sounds with the written word. Slowly, I was able to understand more, and I started thinking about the story directly in English. I remember sitting in a dark room watching a detective drama and realizing that I no longer needed to pause the show to translate an emotion or a joke. Everything was coming to me naturally in English. My daily routines became filled with practice. At work, I carried a small notebook. When I heard a new word or a phrase that I liked, I wrote it down. Later, I would use these words in sentences. During my practice sessions, at lunch, I would sit with a few colleagues who were also learning. We would speak only in English. We sometimes made mistakes, but we celebrated each small step of improvement. Every word felt like a victory, and every conversation was a chance to grow. I learned many grammar rules that I had once found difficult. I practiced the simple present tense by describing my daily habits. I used the past tense to recount memories and experiences. I formed questions, used modal verbs for advice, and even dabbled in the more challenging perfect tenses. Every grammar exercise was now a tool for building my real-life English thinking skills. I began to see that language is not just a set of rules, but a way to express who I am. The changes were gradual, but I started to notice a remarkable difference. One afternoon, I was in a meeting with my team. They were discussing a new project, and I was fully able to participate. I listened carefully, and when I spoke, my sentences flowed easily. I no longer hesitated because I was translating in my mind. Instead, I spoke directly in English as if it were my first language. That moment felt like a breakthrough. I realized that my brain was finally starting to work in English. The feeling was both surreal and empowering. However, the journey was not without challenges. There were many days when my old habits returned. Sometimes I would catch myself thinking in my native language and then laboriously translating into English. I would get frustrated and even angry at myself, but I learned to be patient. I reminded myself that every mistake was a lesson. Each time I noticed myself switching languages, I gently corrected my thought process. I practiced mindfulness and took deep breaths. telling myself that learning was a process that required time. I began to create more structured practices for difficult times. In the morning, I spent an extra 5 minutes reviewing the new words I had learned. In the evening, I recorded my thoughts for 10 minutes and listened to them the next day. I set small goals for each week. For example, one week my goal was to speak for 1 continuous minute in English without pausing. I celebrated every milestone, even if it was small. These goals kept me motivated and focused. One weekend, I decided to visit an English-speaking country. I wanted to immerse myself in an environment where I had no choice but to think and speak in English. I traveled with a friend who was also learning, and we made a pact to speak only in English during our stay. Every interaction, from ordering food in a restaurant to asking for directions, became an opportunity for practice. I remember my hands trembling when I first ordered a coffee, but the barista smiled and understood me perfectly. Gradually, I built more confidence. Those few days outside my familiar home were some of the most educational of my life. After returning home, I noticed that my progress had grown much more than I could have imagined. I had more confidence at work, and even casual conversations with strangers were easier. I attended social gatherings where I knew little about the topics discussed, but I forced myself to listen and participate. I learned to ask questions in English, which often led to interesting conversations and new friendships. Every conversation added a new layer of confidence, and before long, my mind started to think directly in English. In these moments of growth, I also encountered setbacks. Sometimes I would forget a word or mix up my tenses. One particular evening, I was speaking on the phone with a colleague about an important project. In the middle of the conversation, my mind blanked. I paused, searched for the right word, and then the moment slipped away. I felt embarrassed and frustrated. However, I learned that these moments were not failures. They were reminders of my human nature. I took a deep breath, apologized, and explained that I was still learning. To my surprise, my colleague was very understanding and even shared a similar experience from when he was younger. That conversation taught me that mistakes were a natural part of the learning process and that no one was perfect. As months passed, I started to combine all my practices. I watched the news in English, read simple novels, and even listened to audiobooks. I discovered that I could enjoy stories, jokes, and even poetry in a language that I once feared. I remember one rainy evening when I sat by my window, listening to a soft jazz record on my speakers while reading a short story in English. I realized that I was not just learning a language, I was becoming part of a vast world full of ideas and dreams. My brain no longer felt divided between two languages. I was slowly and steadily learning to let English flow as naturally as my native tongue. I also started engaging in online communities where learners helped each other. We would share tips, record our voices, and even correct mistakes for one another. One day, a fellow learner posted a video about his daily routine in English. I watched it many times, mimicking his intonation and sentence structure. I recorded my own version, and every time I reviewed it, I noticed small improvements. This community support was like a family for me, and we motivated each other to keep going even when progress felt slow. My journey was filled with many long nights of practice and moments of quiet determination. I remember a time when I felt completely lost, when I doubted if my efforts would ever pay off. It was a cold winter night, and I sat alone in my room, feeling the weight of my failures. I had several days of not speaking with confidence and avoiding conversations at all costs. In that silence, I looked at all the notes I had written in my journal and the recordings of my voice. I listened to the progress I had made. Even though the mistakes were still there, I also heard many moments where my English was clear and confident. This reminded me that progress is not always a straight line. It is full of ups and downs. With renewed determination, I continued my practice, one small sentence at a time. By the time 1 year had passed, the change was undeniable. I no longer had to force my mind to think in English. It was beginning to happen naturally. I would sometimes dream in English, a sign that my brain had finally accepted it as a language of thought. I started thinking about everyday things, what to have for dinner, or how to plan my weekend, in English without a second thought. This breakthrough was the moment when I realized that my dream had come true. My friends and family also noticed the change. When I visited home, I would speak in English with people I met, and they would compliment me on my improvement. My teachers, who once saw me struggle in class, now believed that I had mastered the art of natural English thinking. Every compliment and every word of encouragement pushed me to continue learning and improving. Today, I work in an international company where every day is a chance to use English naturally. I lead meetings and write emails confidently. I even volunteer to teach others who face the same challenges I once did. I explain to them that the key is consistency and immersion. I tell them, every small moment counts. Whether it is speaking in front of a mirror or writing a few sentences in a journal, every effort you put in builds a new bridge in your brain between your native language and English. I still wake up each day with the same simple routine. I greet the day in English. I review my notes and I practice a few sentences out loud. I even plan my day in English. Sometimes I talk to myself while doing mundane tasks like washing dishes or walking the dog. I now see these moments as opportunities to grow. The practice is simple, but its power is profound. Reflecting on my journey, I realized that the transformation was not just about learning a language. It was about transforming my entire perspective on life. English helped me understand the world in a different way. It connected me to people I would never have met if I had stayed within the confines of my previous comfort zone. I discovered new ideas, cultures, and friendships. My brain learned to appreciate the beauty of thinking in more than one language. The journey taught me about patience, persistence, and self-love. I learned to accept that learning is a journey with many steps, and that each mistake is a lesson rather than a failure. I began to celebrate every small victory. Whether it was, smooth conversation or a well-pronounced word, I made sure to appreciate my progress. This mindset not only helped me improve my English, but also made me a more confident person in all aspects of life. Now, as I share this story with you, I hope that you too can see that it is possible to change how your brain works. The process is not overnight, but every day that you make the effort counts. If you are struggling with thinking in English, remember that each day is an opportunity to grow. Start small, be consistent, and gradually, you will notice that your mind begins to embrace English naturally. As I continue this journey, I am still learning and adjusting my methods. I try new techniques all the time, like speaking with native speakers online, reading different types of literature, and even trying out creative writing in English. The more I expose myself to the language in various forms, the more natural it feels. I know there will always be challenges ahead, and I welcome them as part of a lifelong learning process. If I can share one final piece of advice from my experience, it is this: trust yourself and believe that you can do it. Replace fear with curiosity. Instead of worrying about mistakes, see them as stepping stones on the path to mastery. Every time you speak, write, or listen in English, you are training your brain. Over time, that training builds a habit so strong that one day, thinking in English will feel as natural as breathing. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it inspires you to take the journey of transforming your own language skills. I believe that each of us can learn to bridge the gap between our native language and English, and in doing so, discover a whole new world of opportunities, friendships, and personal growth. Remember, every great journey begins with a single step. Start today. Speak to yourself in English, listen to English stories, and allow your mind the space to grow in a new language. My journey was long and challenging, but it was also filled with hope, excitement, and the joy of discovery. And most importantly, it proved that with time and perseverance, you too can train your brain to think in English naturally. Keep practicing, keep believing, and one day you will look back and see how far you have come. Your voice, your thoughts, and your heart will all speak the language of your dreams. And that is a gift that will open many doors in your life. This is my story, a long road marked with struggles and triumphs. I share it with you in the hope that it brings a spark of encouragement to your own journey. Practice every day, embrace the challenges, and celebrate the progress. Soon, your brain will think in English as easily as it once thought in your native language, and you will be able to communicate your true self to the world. Thanks for listening to this real-life journey, how I trained my brain to think in English naturally. If this story inspired you or gave you practical ideas, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Fluent by Story for more powerful English learning stories. Remember, fluency is not about perfection, it's about progress. So keep listening, keep practicing, and one day you'll find yourself thinking in English too. See you in the next video.